So, okay, David. We talked about King David last week. So today's a bit different onto one of the next stories about David. This is such a great story. I'm just going to read the story. I haven't got very much to say about it. It's quite a long story. So I'm going to read you a story and then just say a few words about it. The story is found in 1 Samuel 17, and I hope will be lots of fun for you to hear. Now the Philistines gathered their armies for battle. Yes, that's right, it's a war story. And they were gathered at Socoh, which belongs to Judah, and encamped between Socoh and Azekah in Ephes-Dammim. You all know where that is, I take it? And Saul and the men of Israel were gathered and encamped in the valley of Elah, and drew up in the line of battle against the Philistines. The Philistines stood on the mountain on the one side, Israel stood on the mountain on the other side, with a valley between them. And there came out from the camp of the Philistines a champion named Goliath of Gath, whose height was 6 cubits and a span. Okay.
9 feet tall,
About 3 metres.
Yeah, 6 cubits and a span is about 9'9". Ah, you with your 6'8". Beginner. So yes, he was taller than he just. I know most of us know. He was. Stand up a second, let me just say those that don't know. So somebody who's 3 foot tall, about up to his hand.
No, taller than that. That's only just over 8 foot.
Is it? Your arm's only that long. I suppose the arm doesn't start at the top of your head, does it? Yeah, okay. You being normal with that. Okay, so yes, a very tall man, Goliath of Gath. He was 9'9", had a helmet of bronze. I'm just going to go with the helmet was included in the 9'9", I suspect. And it would have been a nice big pointy helmet. A helmet of bronze on his head. He was armed with a coat of mail, and the weight of the coat was 5,000 shekels of bronze. Okay, Rebecca, I know you've got a cheaty Bible there. So 5,000 shekels, what do you reckon? How heavy is that?
58 kilos.
Okay, yes. The conversion table I found online put it at about 56. Anyway, heavy. He was wearing heavy mail. And he had bronze armour on his legs and a javelin of bronze slung between his shoulders. The shaft of his spear was like a weaver's beam. How many of you have seen Avengers Infinity War? Okay, well I won't tell you anything about it then. Yeah, yesterday's birthday present. We're going to see Avengers Infinity War. Really, if your kids are old enough to go on their own, just let them go.
We had to take it going.
Yeah, we should, anyway, yesterday wanted us all to go. It was his birthday present, so we all went. Golly. Yeah, Sheila hated it. I just thought it was 2 hours and 30 minutes too long. It was 2 hours and 40 minutes. Anyway, so the spear, and I won't give you any spoilers then if none of you have got around to seeing it yet. But the shaft of Goliath's spear was like a weaver's beam, quite a broad, hefty thing. And the spear's head weighed 600 shekels of iron, about 7 kilos. So it's not bad as a spearhead. And his shield bearer went before him. He stood and shouted to the ranks of Israel, "Why have you come out to draw up for battle? Am I not a Philistine, and you are not servants of Saul? Choose a man for yourselves. Let him come down to me. If he's able to fight with me and kill me, then we will be your servants. But if I prevail against him and kill him, then you shall be our servants and serve us." And the Philistine said, "I defy the ranks of Israel this day. Give me a man that we may fight together." When Saul and all Israel heard the words of the Philistine, they were dismayed and greatly afraid. Now David. So the story's always going to go quite well when it says, now David. Well, not always. Maybe next week or the week after we'll hear of a different one. But this time, now David was the son of an Ephrathite of Bethlehem in Judah, named Jesse, who had 8 sons. In the days of Saul, the man was already old and advanced in years. The 3 oldest sons of Jesse had followed Saul to battle. And the names of his 3 sons who went to the battle were Eliab the firstborn, next to him Abinadab, and the 3rd Shammah. David was the youngest. The 3 eldest followed Saul, but David went back and forth from Saul to feed his father's sheep at Bethlehem. For 40 days the Philistine came forward and took his stand, morning and evening. And Jesse said to David his son, "Take for your brothers an ephah of this parched grain and these 10 loaves, and carry them quickly to the camp to your brothers. Also take these 10 cheeses to the commander of their 1,000. See if your brothers are well, and bring some token from them." Now Saul and then all the men of Israel were in the valley of Elah, fighting with the Philistines. David rose early in the morning, left the sheep with a keeper, and took provisions and went as Jesse had commanded him. And he came to the encampment as the host was going out to the battle line, shouting the war cry. Israel and the Philistine drew up for battle, army against army. And David left the things in charge of the keeper of the baggage and ran to the ranks and went and greeted his brothers. Do you remember we were saying last week what a warm greeting that's likely to be? If you remember last week we talked about David being chosen from amongst all his brothers, the youngest, the little boy who's out on the hill looking after sheep, and Samuel comes to choose the next king. And he looks at all these tall, strong, handsome chaps, the 3 older brothers, and says, "Nope, nope, not you either. No, not you either." And then to Jesse, "Any other boys you might have forgotten?" Goliath is the little one who she gets him. And then anointed him as the next king in front of all his older brothers. So you can imagine them how well disposed they were towards him. They were thinking, that's our boy, isn't that nice? We're the firstborn, secondborn, and thirdborn, but no, the little 8th-born, the scruffy one, is going to be the next king. So here he is. David now turns up and says, "Hello, brothers." And as he talks with them, the champion, the Philistine of Gath, Goliath by name, came up out of the ranks of the Philistines and spoke the same words as before. And David heard him. All the men of Israel, when they saw the man, fled from him and were much afraid. There's a valley between them. But, yeah. And the men of Israel said, "Have you seen this man who's come up? Surely he's come up to defy Israel. And the king will enrich the man who kills him with great riches, and will give him his daughter, and make his father's house free in Israel." And David said to the men who stood by him, "What shall be done for the man who kills this Philistine and takes away the reproach from Israel? For who is this uncircumcised Philistine, that he should defy the armies of the living God?" Who is this Philistine, that he should defy the armies of the living God? And the people answered him in the same way. "So shall it be done to the man who kills him." Now Eliab, the eldest brother, heard when he spoke to the men. And Eliab's anger was kindled against David. And he said, "Why have you come down? And with whom have you left those few sheep in the wilderness?" Right, just those few sheep. That's all you do. You just look after a few sheep. "I know your presumption and the evil of your heart, for you've come down to see the battle." And David said, "What have I done now? Was it not but a word?" And he turned away from him towards another and spoke in the same way. And the people answered him again as before. When the words that David spoke were heard, they repeated them before Saul, and he sent for him. And David said to Saul, "Let no man's heart fail because of him. Your servant will go and fight with this Philistine." And Saul said to David, "You are not able to go against this Philistine to fight with him, for you are but a youth. And he has been a man of war from his youth." And David said to Saul, "Your servant used to keep sheep for his father. And when there came a lion or a bear and took a lamb from the flock, I went after him and struck him and delivered it out of his mouth. And if he arose against me, I caught him by his beard and struck him and killed him. Your servant has struck down both lions and bears, and this uncircumcised Philistine shall be like one of them, for he has defied the armies of the living God." And David said, "The Lord who delivered me from the paw of the lion and from the paw of the bear will deliver me from the hand of this Philistine." And Saul said to David, "Go, and the Lord be with you." Then Saul clothed David with his armour, put a helmet of bronze on his head, and clothed him with a coat of mail. And David strapped his sword over his armour. And he tried in vain to go, for he had not tested them. And David said to Saul, "I cannot go with these, I have not tested them." So David put them off. He took his staff in his hand, chose 5 smooth stones from the brook, and put them in his shepherd's pouch. His sling was in his hand, and he approached the Philistine. The Philistine moved forward and came near to David, with his shield-bearer in front of him. And when the Philistine looked and saw David, he disdained him, for he was but a youth, ruddy and handsome in appearance. The Philistine said to David, "Am I a dog that you come to me with sticks?" The Philistine cursed David by his gods. The Philistine said, "Come to me, and I will give your flesh to the birds of the air and to the beasts of the field." David said to the Philistine, "You come to me with a sword and with a spear and with a javelin, but I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. This day the Lord will deliver you into my hand, and I will strike you down and cut off your head. And I will give the dead bodies of the host of Philistines in this day to the birds of the air and the wild beasts of the earth, that all the earth may know there is a God in Israel, and that all in this assembly may know the Lord saves not with the sword and spear. For the battle is the Lord's, and he will give you into our hand." When the Philistine arose and came and drew near to meet David, David ran quickly toward the battle line to meet the Philistine. David put his hand in his bag, took out a stone and slung it, struck the Philistine on his forehead. The stone sank into his forehead, and he fell on his face to the ground. So David prevailed over the Philistine with a sling and a stone, struck the Philistine and killed him. There was no sword in the hand of David. David ran and stood over the Philistine, took his sword, drew it out of its sheath, and killed him, and cut off his head with it. When the Philistines saw their champion was dead, they fled. And the men of Israel and Judah rose with a shout, and pursued the Philistines as far as Gath and the gates of Ekron, so that the wounded Philistines fell on the way from Shaaraim as far as Gath and Ekron. And the people of Israel came back from chasing the Philistines and plundered their camp. David took the head of the Philistine, brought it to Jerusalem, but he put his armour in his tent. Well, it's quite a long story, isn't it? What a great story. You know, you like action stories. There are some similarities in that story to the film that I mentioned earlier. I won't go into any details. Don't just spoil it for you. Anyone keen on seeing it? Stuart? Avengers not your thing?
I've read really bad reviews of it.
No? Okay.
Oh,
I haven't seen any of the others, so it kind of made no sense really. So this story, really well known. Last time we saw David was left behind in the fields tending the sheep. Not much has changed. Still too young to be properly considered a man and become a soldier. Again in this story, he's back home looking after a few sheep. Goliath, this 9'9" chap, challenging the whole army. And often the custom in those times was not for all the soldiers of both armies to fight, because that would inevitably be an enormous death toll. The kings and leaders would often just choose their champion, and they would fight a proxy battle. So champions from each side would have a battle, and the kings and leaders would say, okay, fine, whoever wins out of those two, we'll go with it. At least we leave with many lives intact. So that was the plan. Goliath is saying, come on then, send me your toughest. 40 days, morning and night, 80 odd times, this giant comes out and says, who have you got then? And they cower on the hillside. Challenging day after day. And Saul, king at the time, the first king of the people of Israel, has got no plan. He's got no clue, and he's got no background. Be bold and very courageous, God said to Joshua. No sign of that here. And then this little lad comes, David, tending the sheep. Daddy sends him to the front line to take cheese sandwiches for his brothers and for the men. David gets there, hands out the cheese sandwiches, and then says, what's going on here? Just a curious boy. You know, you can imagine he's probably about, 12, 14. He's curious. What's going on? What's taking so long? You just got one bloke. What are you doing? And so the people around start telling him, and tell him that the king has got lots to give him. He'll give him wealth beyond imagine, and his daughter's hand in marriage. And the brothers hear this, and they're resentful. You remember watching the anointing of David as the next king might not have been that great. And maybe they feared that he was the better man. And anyway, they insult him. Shouldn't you be tending? What have you done with those few sheep? Not even, I know there's a big flock, I hope you've got to do with them. Just, what have you done with those few sheep? David isn't insulted. This is insulted, but he isn't put off. And he starts showing some of what makes us realise he was God's choice. Because all of these grown men, an entire army, sitting on a hillside, looking across, seeing one big fella, and going, ooh, he's big. I reckon he's a good 8 foot. Ooh, 9 probably. Ooh, no, he's more than 9. He's probably 10 foot just in his bare feet. And this little boy sees the difficulty. Who is this Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God? Goes to Saul and says, let no man's heart fail because of him. Saul has been looking at this giant for 6 weeks, morning and evening, and going, he's a lot bigger than I am. I can't win. David sees the giant and says, he's nothing to God. How can I lose? Saul and an entire army looking at this bloke. David comes along. Well, he's going to fall a long way, because his faith was in God, not in himself. The same giant, but a different perspective, one of faith, not fear. And with complete confidence in God's ability, David steps up, and he's mocked. He's just a sandwich boy. He's not dismayed. He persuades the king to let him have a go. He says, I've killed some bears and some lions when they attacked the sheep. The Lord who delivered me from the paw of the lion and the paw of the bear would deliver me from the hand of this Philistine. Well, Saul wants to protect this young lad. He doesn't want to be thought of as a callous king that let a child go up against a giant unprotected. So he says, wear my armour. The king's armour was quite a big deal, so wear my armour. So he's offering him his protection. David tries it on. Well, it's a joke. A bronze helmet, a chest piece, a massive sword. He can hardly move. So there's a little lad in a grown man's suit of armour. And off it comes. I haven't tested it. I haven't tested it. I can't even walk in it. Off it comes. And he steps out into the valley, much to the amusement. So you can imagine the Philistine army on the opposite hillside all laughing. They've sent a boy. They've sent a boy. Look at Goliath. He's the size of a house. But Goliath is actually quite cross. He probably feels insulted. Am I a dog that you come to me with sticks? And the Philistine cursed David by his gods. He said to David, come to me, I will give your flesh to the birds of the air, to the beasts of the field. David, not put off. You come to me with a sword and a spear and with a javelin. I've got a better weapon than that. You come to me with a spear and a javelin. I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. His trust in God. This day the Lord will deliver you into my hand. I will strike you down, cut off your head, and give the dead bodies of the host of Philistines to the birds and to the wild beasts, that all the earth may know there's a God in Israel. That all this assembly will know that the Lord saves not with a sword and spear. The battle is the Lord's. He will give you into our hands. And that's how you win a battle against the enemy. Because when you try and fight the enemy yourself, you'll fall. But when you can say, the battle is the Lord's. When you choose your battle by choosing the one who defies the name of the Lord of hosts, the one who defies the God of the armies of Israel. And your approach is, God will win this. That's what David does. The rest is history. David takes 5 stones and his sling, and with the first one, hits Goliath, boom, right between the eyes, and he drops to the floor. I often wonder whether Goliath has a brain tumour. Well, it really matters now because he's dead. But there are certain brain tumours that can affect both your size. So if you've got a brain tumour that secretes growth hormone, he's got a pituitary tumour, secretes growth hormone from birth. This lad's been growing at an excessive rate and is now 9'9". but it also presses on the nerves that affect your vision. And what you often lose, it's very uncommon now because it's treated much earlier, is you lose your peripheral vision. So you get that kind of narrow focus. Maybe you just didn't see the stone coming. Who knows? Just a bit of speculation. Either way, he didn't see the stone. It hit him right between the eyes, and he goes down. David goes up to him. He didn't take the sword. He took Goliath's own sword from him, off with his head, and the Israelites realise the battle is won, and they go after him. Like the plan we talked about last week, we talked about David's being chosen. This was an old plan. This wasn't a new surprise thing. This is God at work in David's life. What do you think all the army of Israel thought of David after that? Because if you presented him to them as a sandwich boy and said, here's your next king. You know, he's only 13 or so, and he's going to bring his big brothers some bread and cheese. But he's going to be the next king. How would they have responded to that? Really? I'm not sure I can go with that. When you present them, the boy who had won the battle, single-handedly, okay, God did it, but he was the only person there who had the courage to face the enemy. So all along, this is God's preparation for David. And even earlier in David's life, his preparation for this was protecting the sheep. Just looking after sheep. Chasing away lions and bears. It doesn't sound like he just chased them away. He kind of went after them as well. You know, if a lion came and took one of my lambs and ran away with it, I'd go, oh, that's a shame, I've lost a lamb. I must watch out. At least he can kill me or one of the bigger sheep. I'll have to rebuild that bit of fence. Or I wouldn't think to go, I'm going after it. Would you chase a lion? Remember that story of Benaiah who chased a lion into a pit on a snowy day and then went in after it and killed it? Chase a lion into a pit. Oh, the lion's gone in the pit. Great, I can run away now. No, he goes in after it. He became one of David's guardsmen, one of David's soldiers. This is all God's preparation for David. And all of the armies would have seen Saul 6 weeks. He sits there going, haven't we got any ideas? Any of you feeling brave enough? And I don't think it should be me and the king. Where would we be without the king? So it probably shouldn't be me. Have you got anyone else? You're quite big, aren't you? I mean, you're about 6'8". Fancy having a go? I don't know, he looks a bit mean. I mean, I'm not quite sure why a king didn't say, you, get down there and do your best. So maybe he wasn't a great king. But this is an old plan. This is God preparing the people of Israel for King David. This is an old plan. It's God's plan, but last week, remember, we talked about it being an old plan, and although it's God's plan, he used a man to do the job. He used Samuel to go and anoint David. And the same this time. He chooses a man, a young man, ruddy and handsome. It says that last week when we were reading where David was chosen. He was a child, ruddy and handsome. Here we are again. Samuel was obviously convinced in his writings that it's important that we know David was ruddy and handsome. He chooses a man. Samuel, when he went to choose David, was kind of scared at the thought of it, really. He was worried about what the people might do. And he got all confused, but he was obedient. David was different. He wasn't scared. There's no sign of it. When would you think he'd, as he's going, think, I might get killed here? It doesn't read like that. It reads like he's full of confidence, not in himself, but in God. He did take 5 stones, not just one. And if his faith was absolutely, this is just going to take one shot, Maybe that's testing God too far. He chooses a man to carry out. God chooses a man to carry out this plan. David is bold at the beginning. He's determined throughout. And he's obedient and fulfills the promise he makes. God sees our hearts, not the outward appearance. So, but God's purpose was achieved not really by human power. All of that army, Saul's army, was there. God's purpose was achieved through faith. The faith of one man changed an army, changed a battle. 2 armies, 6 weeks, nothing going on. Presumably they were sort of going back to the supply chains. You better go back to town and get some more food for us. You better go to our town. Keep supplying an army. And apparently, I'm not I don't have any particular interest in military history, but my understanding from friends who have been is that one of the hardest parts of running a battle is supplying the army. It's not having the army there, it's feeding them and getting them places and making sure they've got everything they need. So for 6 weeks, all these resources being consumed, and God changes the whole situation in one day by one little sandwich bowl. As we heard about last week, when David was anointed, that the Spirit of God rushed upon David from that day forward. And here we're seeing it. The Spirit of God is in David. It's rushed upon him. And he has complete confidence where all of the people of Israel have nothing to say. Zechariah chapter 4, we read the prophet writing this, "Not by might nor by power, but by my Spirit, declares the Lord." Not by might nor by power, but by my Spirit, declares the Lord. That's how God chooses to do things. The king and all his soldiers with this outward appearance, but they were afraid. Their hearts were hardened. They were unmoved. Twice a day Goliath came out. He wasn't taunting them, he was taunting God. He was saying, "Where is your God?" And they were going, "I don't know." David sees him defying God. 3 little things and I'm done. Faith has nothing to do with size. If David had been 10 foot tall and gone into battle, he wouldn't have said, "Well, he was just checking lots of faith." He'd have said, "Well, he was bigger. He was a little lad." Faith has nothing to do with size. Here's another thought. Don't try wearing somebody else's armour. Don't try and protect yourself with the things that other people have protected themselves with. Put on the armour of God. We all have different ways of doing things, don't we? We're all different. Some people are faster runners than others. Some people are bigger and stronger. Some people are wiser and smarter. I don't mean in this group particularly, but throughout the world, throughout God's people, there are those of us who are getting older and slower. Some have got old and slow, and there are some who are much faster. I'm not looking at anyone. You hang on a minute. You can't just blame me for accusing it. I did not say anything. Do you know? Some are oversensitive, some less so.
We will minister to you at the end of
Yeah.
this assignment.
Yeah. Okay. Bring it on. Faith has nothing to do with size. Don't try wearing somebody else's armour. And use whatever God gives you. Don't take a sword if you're good with a sling. Whatever God calls you to, if God is calling you to support somebody in their journey, and what you're hopeless at is talking to people face to face because it makes you really nervous and terrified, but actually you're really good at just sitting quietly by and praying for people. Do that. Do that at least. In that, God may give you the boldness to speak to people. If you're comfortable talking to people and explaining things, do that. Whatever God has given you, use those gifts. Don't wear somebody else's armour. Use whatever is in your hand. You remember Moses saying, well, I can't take these people out of Egypt. I can't even speak properly. That wasn't just me saying that was what Moses said. I can't speak properly. Oh, your brother's got the gift of the gab, have you? And Moses said, how am I going to do it? God says, what is that in your hand? He had what he needed in his hand. We're going to face some challenging times as a church. We have in the past. We will in the future. Our next challenge, in a way, is brought to a head by the place we're worshipping in, and whether we'll be able to continue worshipping in it, because we know that the Methodist folk who are our hosts in this building are finding it increasingly difficult and have decided that they can't continue to sustain worshipping in this building. So we've got to work out what that means for us. Not just about moving buildings, because we've done that before, that's not a big deal. But it's about seeking God, seeing what his purpose is, and seeking a building that is fit for us to do what his purpose is. We'll need courage, we'll need vision, and we'll need purpose. We need to seek God together to find his way. And to act as David did, and as Samuel did, with obedience. Next time, we'll talk about Bathsheba. That'll be fun. Plenty to say about that. And so, I will close with prayer, and then release you to gather any children you may have brought with you. Lord, thank you that you have given us such a full description of this story in your word. Thank you that we hear so much detail of what King David learnt and did as he did. Thank you for his example, the example of faith. I pray that we might have that same confidence, so that we don't even need to worry about our battles, because we know that they're your battles. And that provided we are taking up arms against those who oppose you, the battle is yours, the delivery is yours, and all the glory is yours. We pray that you guide us, Lord. We pray that you'd fill us with your Spirit as you did with David, that you give us the wisdom and discernment. We pray that in these times you are preparing us, as you were preparing David by helping him look after sheep and fighting off lions and bears. Pray that you're preparing us now, Lord, for what lies ahead. We long to see this town changed by the good news that you've invested in us, the good news that you came to earth to die for us, to rise again to new life, and to establish this community of people living and loving you and worshipping you with all our hearts, so that the world is changed for your name alone. Amen. Thank you.